The motor industry is our topic of discussion today, and in the hot seat is Mahen Thambaya, the Managing Director of Kia Motors Lanka. While many vehicle dealers across the country are reporting significantly higher sales figures, there is some concern about the changes in duties and taxes, the devaluation of the rupee and the impact of rising fuel prices. So where is our motor industry headed? Here's Mahen Thambaya to elaborate on these and other issues facing the motor industry today. Welcome to Benchmark, Mahen. The motor industry is in focus today, and are we right in saying that there's some degree of volatility, for the better or for the worse, with the duties and taxes, also the rising price of energy, fuel prices really, and also the free fall of the rupee? What are we seeing today?
In a market where price has been determined by high taxes, volatility is expected, particularly with the change of import taxes, drastic changes, which we've seen in the recent past. One has got to expect it. And there have been one or more reasons why these changes have taken place. And this actually has resulted in this volatility over a period of time, coupled with, of course, the currency fluctuations. And fuel prices, of course, is more attributable to the users and the user pattern eventually, which leads to it. But in terms of the market and the pricing, which is critical for the automobile industry, the high taxes, because you see as much as 150 to 200% currently. Before that, there was anything between 250 to almost 500. So at these levels, you're going to see the reductions impact seriously on the overall price of the vehicle. So that is going to create obviously this serious volatility with one single movement, and that is there, and that fear in the marketplace prevails always as long as these taxes are high.
Now, despite this volatility that we've been talking about, vehicle dealers have been reporting significantly higher sales numbers. So there is money in people's hands, it seems.
Let's not get carried away by the high sales figures that we saw in the particularly last year. The situation before that was very different. Obviously, you had a situation where, like I said, the taxes were very, very high at 250, almost 500 for diesels, particularly in the passenger car segment. So this created a vacuum, sort of, because people who had to replace their vehicles, they are coming up to 4 years or 5 years, the user patterns are to replace them at that time, particularly at the high end, didn't do this because they were simply not affordable and they were far too expensive. So they carried on using what they had. When the taxes were reduced in July 2010, and subsequently a further adjustment took place with the VAT calculation method in the budget in 2010, seriously brought down the total pricing. So people who were waiting in the online to change their vehicles all moved in and started replacing them. So this saw a sudden surge of sales. One swallow doesn't make a summer. So you're not going to see that trend continue, and I think it would be foolish to expect it to continue thereafter.
So you don't think what we have seen will continue? For instance, the motor industry nearly doubled its collective profits last year. So that trend will certainly not be seen this year as well, the way things are.
Quite apart from the rupee devaluation or the drop, which has taken place very recently in the last month or two, that impact will be felt perhaps in the next couple of months. But that is not, that is going to add to the issues of the market leveling off before that, because we see a decline in the figures, obviously, from what it was in the latter half of 2010 and the early part of 2011, for reasons like I explained, because everyone who needed to and who waited had replaced their vehicles. People don't buy cars, new cars every day. So that being said, obviously now the affordability, because of the impact of the rupee depreciation, will begin to be felt by the market as we go along, probably towards the middle and the end of this year.
How do you view the increase in the tax on luxury cars in Budget 2012? What in your assessment do you think was the thinking behind this move, given that the overall strategy is to revive the motor industry?
Revenue generation comes from different forms, and I think the policymakers probably realize that imposing higher import tax, which is already still very high though it was dropped, is only going to have a negative effect. So rather than increase import taxes, having a steady collection of revenue by way of taxes on an annual basis was more prudent, perhaps. So there was a large influx of top-end luxury vehicles during that period when people started replacing their vehicles immediately after the duty reduction. So it gave obviously an opportunity that these cars are new and over a period of 5 years. I say this because this scheme was in operation before and it was suspended for a while, and it has been virtually reintroduced at the last budget. So it's not something new. So I think because most of those cars were new and taxes obviously could be applied, and rather than import tax be increased, which will have a negative impact, I think perhaps policy makers decided that this was a better way to collect revenue. So this is a reason why they imposed the tax.
Like you very rightly mentioned, motor vehicle prices have shot up in the wake of the rupee's free fall, and it is a fact, isn't it, that the average Sri Lankan is not finding it quite easy to afford a vehicle anymore. Are there any steps that the government and even the private sector can do to make purchasing a new car affordable to the general public?
The free fall of the rupee actually and the impact on pricing is far more significant than a tax increase, because when you have high import taxes, like I said, between 150 to 200%, the not only the cost of the vehicle, the duty component percentage also goes up by that amount. So you're going to see an increase in prices of anything between 20 to 30% overall. Simply translating this into prices, you're looking at cars which were around 5 million rupees going up to about 6 to 6.5 million rupees, which is a significant change. When you say the private sector, obviously most of the motor car importers and ourselves will not be able to make any adjustments on this, except obviously the significant increase will be passed on to the customer. That would entirely depend on the government.
Time for a commercial break now. Part 2 of our exclusive interview with Kia Motors' Mahen Thambaya is on the other side. Stay with us. Welcome back. We now continue with our exclusive interview with the Managing Director of Kia Motors Lanka, Mahen Thambaya. On to a more sensitive or maybe a controversial subject, as the case may be. There are lots of permits floating around the country, but more in the main, it's politicians who more often than not have these permits and actually sell it to an unsuspecting member of the public maybe. I do believe that could be an illegal process, but at the same time, is it fair that some corrupt officials actually take advantage of the system, use those huge duty waivers, while the rest of the potential motor buying public just have to suffer in silence and pay those high rates?
Controversial, as you said. It is intended to be given to the public servants. There are different schemes that are operational, and these are granted obviously because the public servants have been perhaps the need is there that they be given vehicles or the ability to buy a vehicle at a cheaper price, and there are restrictions placed on these. It is for the use of their duties during their tenure in office. Whether or not these are sold or whether people profit from it is something obviously which floats around in the market, which the legality and others I think would probably be determined by those in authority. But I have to confess that obviously this trend takes place.
On the subject of affordability, Mahin, most consumers in this country generally use loans or leases to purchase a vehicle, which I guess is the norm in most countries, at least in middle income ones. But when you look at the current prices of new vehicles, would we be moving once again towards used and reconditioned vehicles?
Your first question obviously about the people moving away towards the used cars, that I don't see happening or the necessity or the reason, because used cars most often today are as expensive or in some cases are more expensive than brand new cars. So if it is a monetary reason where affordability comes into question, I don't think that is going to shift people because of whatever the currency movement and the taxation price increases have the resultant price increases are going to see people moving away from that into the more in towards the used or reconditioned, because there's no real benefit from it. So that is not going to certainly have an impact. But obviously we still are very much a country where the used cars, particularly the commercial vehicles, because of the age that has been allowed, has been the marketplace has been flooded with these year-over. Certainly the percentages have dropped because user patterns have changed. People require reliable transport, and people find that the cost of maintenance of old vehicles is rapidly rising.
The green test, Mahin, is now compulsory for vehicle registrations for their annual renewal, and it has also created a fair amount of awareness. However, a fully fledged roadworthy test, which is available in developed countries, we don't have that just yet. How green are we when it comes to the motor industry, and is Sri Lanka actually doing enough to become green and ensure that emissions and that we are a little more environmentally friendly when it comes to the motor industry?
The intentions are there. Some of the laws have been enacted and are in place, and some are being drafted perhaps and have to be implemented. Unfortunately, I think the implementation and the follow-up of policing this is totally inadequate. This is something that is very crucial in the long term and for the future. And I think we are far behind in terms of regionally as well as the world over in terms of implementing the requirements to comply with pollution and the required standards, because manufacturers certainly have gone very far. For example, we have brought in Euro 2 at this present moment, although not fully implemented, whereas other countries, Europe and even in the region, have gone up to Euro 4 and Euro 5 standards. This is the amount of carbon dioxide and emissions that come out of motor vehicles. So I think a lot needs to be done in this area.
So how about the future? Where is the motor industry heading, Mahin? Where do you see it heading, even in the light of the fact that we are having accelerated development in our roadways and expressways and things like that? Does this bode well for vehicle dealers?
The infrastructure development actually would benefit the consumer or the users of motor vehicles. Quite naturally that is going to filter down to, in a way, to the motor trade, because obviously people would be buying vehicles because of the necessity to transport themselves. So this infrastructure is a very important aspect that the people need more than the trade itself. And I think obviously because of the problems that we had in the country with the war over the years, this has been slow. Now we see it being accelerated, and we see that the development that is taking place in terms of infrastructure particularly, which is a very, very important part for the development, not just the automobile trade, but I think for all areas. Efficiency and the cost factors related to it are going to play a primary role in development. So I think that is, it's a great thing to see that government at the moment is putting a lot of emphasis on the road network and the infrastructure. So we are going to see obviously the benefit of this filter down in terms of the trade. People would be obviously inclined to have a vehicle. There is a subtle difference between what people want and what they need. So the need of transport is something that is forms an essential part of people's lives. And when the infrastructure is there for them to conveniently use that need to get about their day-to-day life, I think it will create the marketplace for more vehicles. Thus, the trade would obviously benefit in some way at the end. But the direct benefit of the infrastructure certainly goes to the people and the public rather than it coming straight. It's not a direct thing that the trade is going to benefit as a result.
That was Mahen Thambaya of Kia Motors Lanka. After the break, it's the Voice of Business.